like to welcome to the stage Tip Tat from the VR Fund and Maddy Calendar from Boost VC. And thank you again for joining us for this panel. We're going to go ahead and, similar to last time, we're going to start with some brief intros and just wanted to learn a little bit more about each of your companies. So first question is, could you describe your fund, your accelerator, your investment firm, and what your current portfolio looks like, and what is the strategy around your current portfolio? We can start with Maddy. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Maddy Calendar. I am VP of Accelerator and Portfolio at Boost VC. We are an accelerator and investment fund making sci-fi a reality focused on the future of technology. Sorry, I don't know what I just did. And we invest $500K in emerging technology startups, including a lot of virtual reality companies, through our accelerator program that we run twice a year. And we invest in 10 companies during each accelerator. We have been investing in VR since 2015 and have a large portfolio of really awesome VR companies that I actively work with and support on a regular basis. So that's sort of where my world is on the portfolio support and accelerator side of the investing world.
Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Tipatat Chanavasan. I am general partner, co-founder of the Venture Reality Fund. We are a $50 million VC fund investing in early stage VR, AR, AI. Our general belief is that VR, AR is the future of computing, and we're looking for companies that are going to help kind of drive that or accelerate the adoption of VR and AR. And that's kind of what we do. We've done 36 investments so far. Our check sizes range from $300K to $1 million. Primarily seed Series A. We've probably done about, I think, 60% enterprise, 40% consumer. And some of our investments include companies like Embodied Labs, which you heard talk earlier, but also some of the hit VR games that people play, like Beat Saber, Rec Room, and Job Simulator.
Awesome. And now, similar to the last panel, if you have questions, we would like to have you line up over there in the corner so I can see you. We're going to intersperse audience Q&A because we want the audience to drive our questions, and I'm sure you'll have plenty of questions to ask these folks. Actually, we'll go ahead and start with our first question from Joe. Go ahead. You can come up on stage to ask a question.
Okay, cool. Hi, guys. So I guess my question is, when you're looking to invest in like an early stage VR company, what are some of the proof points that you're looking for to say, hey, this is a company we feel like we can invest in?
Great question. Thank you, Joe. Who wants to take that? And you guys can discuss as well.
Sure.
Yeah, Tipatat, you can kick it off.
Okay. So primarily we'll look at, why are you using VR, AR? Is this the right technology to solve this problem? Then is the problem opportunity big enough? And then, are you the right team to actually solve this or address this problem and execute on the vision? And also, too, we're looking for kind of proof point traction. So definitely, MVPs. We wouldn't fund any project that's just a PowerPoint. Like, we want to see something that shows that you can actually build the product, or at least an early stage example of the product. And oftentimes, too, we'll look for examples of, are you actually talking to the right customers? Have you proved out some of your theories or hypotheses with the right customers to say this is the right way to the right way to sell this or approach this. Trying to think what else is there. I mean, I think that's the general sense in a nutshell. But honestly, too, I think one of the things that's interesting is it's kind of changed from when we first started. Before there was a VR market, before there were headsets in the wild, we had to take much more leaps of faith. But now, because there's all the VR headsets are pretty common now. There's a lot of people, like Carrie mentioned. You can find non-dilutive funding to at least get you past the first couple hurdles, or now customers actually are interested in VR projects, so they're actively funding VR projects. So there's that opportunity to say, okay, you've been working with a customer, they're interested, you're almost done with the pilot, they're about to go bigger. Now you need support to actually grow your company to support a bigger rollout. That's the opportunity to talk to VCs.
Yeah, and I would add in seconding Tipatat's answer, VR is not necessarily the answer to all of the world's problems, but I think there are some really critical problems that VR solves really, really well. And also, you don't have to be in VR the entire time to have a product to make it really viable. So I think it's also looking at what problem does VR solve in a greater scheme of like a product, and how can you leverage VR for the most value, and at this point kind of in the least amount of time. So VR is still early. We're still fixing a lot of pieces of it. So how can we make your 15 minutes to 2 hours in VR the most valuable time for any potential user, consumer, or enterprise?
Thank you, and thank you
Yeah,
for the question.
if I was also just to add one more thing
Yeah,
too, if I was
please.
to rank things, I mean, I feel like the demo has to be just huge. Like I feel like there's so many people that get caught up on trying to make the pitch deck great or perfect and this and that. I'm like, no, your demo has to be amazing, and if it has to show me the potential or how easy it is to do, or like how this could be a huge opportunity. Like I feel like I've done so many where people, telling me this great story, amazing team backgrounds, and then the demo is just garbage, and I'm just like, man, like what are you doing? Like, focus on the demo, because that's going to be the most important thing when you're pitching someone about what you're trying to do.
I'd actually like to do a follow-up question on the demo. So sometimes the reason why the demo might be garbage might be there's a disconnect between what the developers think is ready for investors and what the investors expect, having seen everybody's demos. Is there any advice you can give of folks with demos and pitching with demos,
Sure.
how to get there, or how to check their understanding?
Yeah, I think a lot of times too, people try to do too much,
Mhm.
and instead focus on like one little thing. For game devs, they often call it like a vertical slice, but like don't try to show all of, like, I feel like so many people are like, oh, we have 12 features and they're all half-assed. If you just done one feature and made it look and made it feel very very good, very well done, very polished, I think that would, again, say, okay, this is our understanding of what the park needs, or where this has to go. I mean, the other way to think about it too is to say, like, when we see a lot of these, or I guess another way to think about it is saying, okay, well, how can we leverage what else exists to prove our hypothesis, right? And so I feel like a lot of people are saying, okay, we have to build we're building everything from scratch, or in Unity from scratch. But it's like, okay, well, if you just want to prove out, you're a social, organization, you want to do, I don't know, workouts in VR. You don't have to build out your own metaverse application. You can just use one of the existing ones and build in VR chat a fitness group and show that, hey, there's a bunch of people that like to work out in VR, and this is the way that we can prove it really quickly, right? Like you don't have to build everything. So leverage the fact that there's existing platforms, existing tools that other people have, invested in this stuff, and then just say, hey, can we at least, not the final product is going to be on this, but at least can you prove a lot of your concepts and ideas off of existing stuff without having to code or spend too much resources figuring out all this other stuff.
And go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add rapid prototyping from like a rapid prototyping perspective. Like any startup needs to really think about how they're actually going to get their users to schedule it on their calendar. Like that, you can leverage a bunch of different toolbox, like existing tool sets that you can be able to put it together to be able to put together exactly what TipTat's saying, like a demonstration that there's enough desire and demand for what it is that you're creating. Even if the VR piece isn't there, like getting the community together, putting it on the calendar, rallying around in an existing VR application, and then figuring out what that next step is. Like doing the small MVP prototyping pieces first, just to get traction and understand, what it is the consumer or enterprise really wants first, before going and spending a ton of money on building out a whole product.
I absolutely agree. And piggybacking off of the proof of concept and the MVP, what we did was we held our first 2 meetups in VR chat, and we looked into VR chat, we looked into AltSpace VR, because our core team was still working on projects, paid projects and things like that. So we couldn't, full dive all in on this thing before we proved the concept. So we proved the concept in VR chat first, And from that, we were able to learn specific pain points about each of the different existing applications. So that learning was useful, in addition to just learning how to design networking sessions in VR, how to design talks in VR, things like that. So I 100%, I absolutely agree with these. So I wanted to hear from some examples in your existing portfolios. What companies, two-part question. One part is, what companies have succeeded, do you believe, or did well in terms of raising funding? How do you think they got there? And second is, using the specific example, if you can use specific example, why do you think they've succeeded overall as a company, as a product or service? The success stories, from your portfolios. You want to start, Maddy?
Sure. So I'm going to sort of counter to that too.
Okay.
Yes, we've seen a lot of companies raise money, but I've actually seen a lot of companies recently start making money in VR. So I think there is like a counter to venture right now in VR, and I think that's a traction point that it needs to be discussed, because I think there's a lot of money to be made in VR today. And so, first is like, I think you can make money in VR. We are sort of in a weird time, and being a sustainable business is a really healthy thing to be, so that you can continue to thrive. And anything that gets you to sustainability is also going to bring additional traction, additional customers, clients, and it makes you focus on creating and adding true value, not just something that is a nice to have, because you need people to pay for it. So when people put money on the line, I think it's really important. So I think that right now VR is not like, I don't know if it's like the most popular thing to be investing in right now. I definitely think there's an appetite for it still, but I do think that there's a way to make money today in VR, and that should be your first goal. From a venture perspective, raising capital is, to the point we were talking about earlier, proving out the traction and the vision and the market, and then that you have existing clients or you have existing customers that are willing to pay or join or be a part of your community. So, and I'm sort of blanking on examples right this second. I know Tipta has some really good ones, so I'll let him talk more about his examples.
Well, I mean, I think Maddy nailed it. Like, it was kind of what I alluded to earlier, where again, there are customers that are putting up pilots and are willing to pay for pilots. So like even early on, you can get some revenue, right? And I feel like showing that again, you're filling a need, you're solving a problem, and that customers are so excited for it that they'll actually pay for it. And then thinking about, okay, well, are these just marketing fluff pilots, or are they actually going to be pilots that are affecting their business? And make sure that the pilots are designed in a way that show real ROI for the customers, that they know, okay, well, you know what? You hit this goal of 3xing their their sales pipeline or whatever, then this is going to unlock a bigger opportunity. Or saying, hey, you know what? You're going to show that people that train in your application learn 3 times faster, and that reduces the cost of what pays for itself. Right? Like,
mute your mic.
Getting very focused on what the value proposition is for your customer or for the industry, I think that's the key. And we're starting to see VR companies really do that. And so when a VR company can show that kind of that kind of value, then it becomes a no-brainer. And it's not about, are they a VR company or not? It's just like, are they actually providing value to their customers, right? And I feel like you guys this is very enterprise focused, but I did want to talk a little bit about on the consumer side too, and what we're seeing in VR. I still think that bar none, the biggest success story in VR gaming, and maybe VR period, is Beat Saber, right? What's interesting about it is not just how successful they've been, but if you think about the path they took to get there, these were 3 full-time developer, like core developer founders, 2 part-time. They worked over a year on this game with no funding, and it was just a passion project, just something that they were excited for. And when they launched, they used early access. They built a game that if they had pitched to any publisher or any VC and said, hey, look, we're building a game that's a music rhythm game, and it has 10 unlicensed songs you've never heard of made by our CEO, and it's single player, right? Like, at least on a set, people would be like, oh my God, that's barely a game. That's barely a tech demo, right? But it was so polished, so well done that, they made, I think, $2 million their first month. Right, and that snowballed into doing over $20 million, being the first, platinum selling VR game. But what's interesting about all of that is, like, again, they didn't have to do this with investment or permission from anyone else. They built something that, again, wasn't too much, but was just really well polished and well executed. And that, because it was early access, the audience understood that, responded to it, that gave them the next step. And I feel like a lot of people are still trying to say, like, we need to build Grand Theft Auto 5.
Right.
But it's like, before you get to Grand Theft Auto 5, you still need to build a basic driving game or a basic shooting game or a basic,
Exactly.
build the core, and that kind of goes back into don't try to do everything and just make sure that you do one thing and polish it and be laser focused on what you're trying to solve, who you're trying to solve it for, and that it's awesome.
And on the enterprise side, I would say, like, if you're working on a pitch deck in enterprise right now, like, try to not mention virtual reality in your pitch deck until the very end, or if at all. Like, try to put together your pitch and actually not make VR a topic. Like, it's the best tool for me to solve this problem, so it's obviously going to be in VR, but you don't need to lead with VR. I think actually it's to your disadvantage sort of to lead with VR in your pitch deck. So I would challenge you to at least, like, try to write a pitch deck or a kind of your one-liner without saying the word VR, and really get to the value of what VR is actually bringing to the table that wasn't there before for the company.
Yeah, one thing too, I want to talk a little bit about on the enterprise side, in terms of, like, when I look at projects, I feel like so many people are so quick to try to just recreate reality, but it has to be better than reality, right? Like, so the example I give would be like, okay, how can you not just make it feel like, okay, for a virtual meeting app, right? Like, virtual meeting, it can't just feel like, oh, does this make it feel like I'm in a real meeting with another person? Like, no, you have to think like, okay, no. What would I love to have? Why do meetings in general suck? And how can I make it so good that instead of saying, oh, we're going to use VR when we don't want to meet in person, it's like, no. I'd rather do all my meetings in VR because I'm so much more effective, or they're so much more productive,
Exactly.
right?
The
Like,
value prop.
like thinking about this, COVID thing, I feel like a lot of people are jumping on this idea of, virtual meetings and virtual conferences. And I think the idea is like, well, most of the applications that we see are still kind of like trying to replicate reality and not trying to go beyond it. And so that way, when COVID calms down, people just go back to the regular way. But if we can show people, oh my God, this is a better way of doing it, you're so much more effective, or you're so much more efficient, then hopefully we can get people to say, oh, you know what? I'd rather not do it the old way. The old way wasn't that great after all. So I feel like this is the opportunity that we have really right now to kind of show off, okay, not just that VR can be an alternative, but that VR is the better alternative.
Yeah. Piggybacking off of that, I'd say better. And what we try to do is also better and different. What is different that you can do in VR that you can't do in real life at all? And just to use one of our ideas as an example, unproven right now, but one thing that we think would be different would be being able to being able to do demos in VR, but also like virtual business cards and AI recommendation systems and things like that, that you don't have, you could open up an app on a smartphone to do that. You can, you can try to drive a giant, Tesla car into the auto show, but you can't actually do a test drive there. So different things that wasn't possible in real life originally. I think that's a big value proposition. But going back to what you said as well, better and different. Does anybody from the audience have any questions? You're welcome to stand in the corner anytime, or in the corner if you want to raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll continue. We just have like maybe one or two more questions left. So we alluded to this earlier when we were talking about enterprise, when we were talking about entertainment, Beat Saber. So moving forward in the future, where do you see for the non-VR investors out there, or for the companies that are looking for different directions to explore in, where do you see are the markets, the growth opportunities moving into the future? You could gauge it with 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, or even longer, however you like. But the biggest growth opportunities that you folks see from where you're standing, all the companies that you've looked at, and the market research that you guys have done.
Sure. I guess I'll jump in and start. I don't know how many of you guys have read. I recently did an article with Road to VR, kind of talking about the opportunities in the gaming space in VR, especially because of the success of the Quest and the fact that PlayStation has 5 million PSVRs out there. But again, For small startups, not just so for small gaming startups, my theory or my hypothesis is that VR is actually the best place, the most the biggest opportunity in all of gaming right now. Because in mobile gaming, even if you have $1 million a month to spend on marketing and world-class IP, that still doesn't mean success, right? And so it's like for the budget of a monthly marketing spend, you could probably create a couple of VR games that could succeed in the market, right? So that's kind of like one area that I think is really hot or really interesting. The other bigger opportunity too is enterprise, right? Like focusing down on but what type of enterprise plays now. I feel like training was the first step. Training people to do their jobs, and Striver's shown a great success. They now train over 1 million people with Walmart and all sorts of other companies like Verizon. But the next step is actually doing the work in VR and being productive or XR, but being productive in VR and AR. And I think this is where companies like Gravity Sketch, other companies out there where people are actually doing the work in the headset, showing that again. I think they had Ford designers saying that used to take days of work is now hours of work using Gravity Sketch, and trying to figure out where are those opportunities across all sorts of different enterprise opportunities, right? So I think that's the thing for me, that I'm trying to look for that transition of training is good, but doing the work and being productive in VR AR, that's great.
Reminds me of what Pam said on the last. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Oh, it reminds me of what Pam said on the last panel about scalability, scaling, and making cost effectiveness, time saving. Yeah. Yeah, Matt.
I was just going to add. I mean, productivity was going to be my sort of thing that I think really is a way for VR to get into everyone's everyday worlds. I think we've seen so many people, like every enterprise team, any startup team has so many distributed tool sets out there. It's not uncommon to like be trying a new app or a new productivity tool on a regular basis. So I think it's a really great opportunity for a clean UX UI, to really think more spatially about productivity and bring things together in a unique format. And maybe a little bit more magical. I think all of our work tools need to be a little bit more magical and have a little bit more kind of like a fantastic sort of piece to them, where you really feel and like are able to lean into like the emotion of what it is that you're creating or trying to explain, and not just a task list per se. But to Tipitat's earlier point, like a company named Primitive allows you to see your entire code base. So in virtual reality, and you can actually onboard your new developers much faster. And so there are new ways of thinking about existing things that we're already doing, but able to make that productivity, make that onboarding much faster, much cleaner, much quicker, and I think there's real value to be added.
A quick
I think there's a
follow-up.
ton of real value to be added.
Do you have an example of an existing productivity application that's magical? Like is Microsoft Word magical, or?
Well, I'm sort of.
I would say Microsoft Word was magical when it first came out.
For sure.
You had to compare it to like writing on a piece of paper.
Okay.
Yeah, Microsoft Word was damn magical, right? Like if you think about what graphic design used to be before Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop,
I see.
and you're like, okay, I had to be an X-Acto knife expert to be able to do graphic design. Like, yes, so, but in that way, like since we grew up with it, it didn't seem magical for us. But then we have to think in the
so
same
easy.
way.
Yeah. Wow, this saves me so
magical?
much time. Yeah. Wow, I could do things
I
I couldn't do before.
People experimenting with like Superhuman and other like email or productivity tools that have reduced UX and UI like hurdles, and try to really streamline your productivity into a very simple format. I think also like from an animation perspective, obviously there's a ton of opportunity for design and animation in VR. You're already thinking spatially when you're thinking about game design, or you're thinking about animated movies or films or shorts. Like it seems like a very logical way. I think I saw Masterpiece in here somewhere.
Yep.
And so just thinking through like, how does what tools could we create that actually fit the end product better using VR than they do using a two-dimensional screen. So
Awesome.
Yeah, I think another example that isn't as obvious to most people, but like data science, looking at numbers, it's not that exciting. People are like, okay, numbers are 2D. But then again, if you take that, data graph, bring it into 3D in 3 dimensions, bring it in VR, make it collaborative, you're really democratizing something that's very obtuse to most people, right? So I think taking abstract work and turning it visual and spatial, I think that's going to be a lot of the power that we see in terms of productivity.
Awesome. Thank you. And just one final question. In a tweet, if you were to give our audience of VR entrepreneurs in enterprise, in consumer entertainment, non-VR investors, what piece of advice should stick after your talk? What do you want them to know?
I'm bad at tweeting, but I would challenge everyone to try to not mention VR in their pitch deck. That I think you'll learn a lot about your business, and you'll learn about where your real value lies in your company. Not a tweet, but close-ish.
No, it's good. Yeah, VR as a tool. Yeah, I interpret it.
What would I say? I mean, I would say that now is the time. I feel like there are a lot of bottlenecks before in terms of like, oh, the hardware, can we really scale it? I think the Quest is showing that this is the right hardware that can scale, not just for consumers, but for enterprises as well. And so I think a lot of ideas that might not have been working before, at least that were restricted by the hardware, no longer have those limitations. And so I think, really go back now and think about, okay, now that this isn't one of the blockers, what can really, where can we really take this? So that's the opportunity is now, and it's really on us to fuck it up.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tipita. Thank you, Maddy. Thank you, everybody here in the audience, for coming. We'll go ahead and move on now to our Speak with the Speakers networking. We'll have our speakers come down to the white area. If you're interested in speaking with the speakers, please stay in the panel room. If you're interested in networking or going to the exhibition booth, please do the networking outside in the exhibition booth, the non-speaker networking. And in closing remarks, I just want to say thank you, everybody, one more time for attending our VR investment conference in VR. We will be sending out a survey shortly later this afternoon. We absolutely need your feedback and would greatly appreciate everybody's feedback. As I mentioned, the dev team, this is a 2.5-week project that the dev team spent on. We have seen a lot of issues. We've learned a lot through this. We want to learn more from you, from your feedback. So thank you again so much. After the networking sessions, I'll also be at the Virtual World Arcade booth, as will probably the rest of the exhibitors. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you. The exhibition closes at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Cool.
All right.
So any questions?
Hey, Nelda, is my mic on?
Hey, Max.
I'll do the first question.
Awesome.
Can I send you guys a follow-up email? Would love to chat. Maybe send a deck. Maybe hop on a call. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Would love to get your feedback. Thank you.
Okay. There's another
Yeah.
area over there or outside.
How do you get
the outside area?
What you doing down there?
I could start with something.
Okay, yeah, sure.
What do you think?
So you talked a lot about
Hey, Jeremy.
products in the
Hey, Richard.
entertainment space, gaming.
Hey, buddy, how's it
and,
going?
Welcome.
I was wondering
question.
Do you want to
if
go
you
outside?
evaluate those
Yeah, let's go outside.
types of companies or proposals differently than